Welcome to Born to be Barefoot. I'm your host, Stuart Gordon, with my co-host, Katie Suyuki. Welcome to Born to be Barefoot podcast. Tonight, I'm, as your host, Stuart Gordon, I'm flying solo. My co-host, Katie, is otherwise occupied in the outback of New Zealand somewhere. But I'm delighted today to have a guest from Canada called Richard Pady. Now, Richard has got the most astonishing background in endurance sports. He's got a background in, well, originally, I believe, as a skier and then a cross-country runner and then a very, very high-level international professional triathlete. And then he moved on to Ironmans and he moved on to ultras and duathlons and just about anything you can think of that involves lots of running and swimming and cycling, I think. So welcome, Richard.
Oh, thank you for having me.
It's an absolute pleasure. Yeah. So I'm right. You're based out in Ontario, Canada. Yes.
Yep. Just about an hour north of Toronto.
Lovely. Good stuff. So I'm over here in England and it's an absolute pleasure to talk to you. I have actually heard about you, Richard, through my colleagues who sponsor this lovely podcast called Barefoot Science. And I believe you're acquainted with that whole system of assessing people using high technology gait assessments and cognitive training and such like.
I'm assuming you are talking about Scott. Yes, absolutely.
Yes.
He has done some fantastic work with me.
Yeah. Scott was actually one of our guests earlier on in the series, which was great fun. So for those people who've listened in and caught a few of these, we'll be touching on the sort of work that Scott did that helped Richard. So in the meantime, then, Richard, what got you started? Start from the very beginning as a young guy. What got you into endurance athletics?
You know, it's interesting about how you get into a sport is always a little bit different. And the way I got into the sport was simply I loved activities. I loved being on school teams. I loved being on any kind of sports team that I could be, like whether it be the ski team or the cross country team. But I quickly learned that I got days off school, so the more teams I could be on, it was better. But then, really, where it all started was when I was 13. There was a half marathon that went by my house, and I said to my mom, like, I don't know why I thought it was interesting, but I was like, what are these people running by our house? And she said, well, this is a half marathon. I'm like, well, that's pretty neat. But what's important to note is that at that time, I hadn't made a track team. That would have been grade 8. I hadn't made a track team. I hadn't been on a cross country running. Well, I had been on cross country running because everyone gets to do cross country running, but I was the 4th runner or the 3rd runner on the team. So I wasn't really, no one's, I was not put out as someone that was good at the sport, but this running thing intrigued me. And so my mom promised the next year we would plan to find out when that race was on and do it. We knew nothing. My mom didn't know anything about half marathons or anything of this nature. So the next year comes around and I go, Mom, when's that race? And she says, well, let me go to the YMCA and I'll find out. And so she goes to the YMCA. She goes, oh, it's on Sunday. Well, it was Tuesday. And so, off of zero running, we went and ran half the course on Tuesday, half the course on Thursday, and I ran it on Sunday, and I loved it. I had absolutely no problems doing it. I look back on the time I ran on a very hilly course and was really quite pleased. And yeah, we thought nothing of it. We were so naive. I don't think I ever touched water. Of course, at that time it was 1989. There was no gels or anything like this. So it was just, it was just a pure run. And yeah, it was there at the finish line of that race that I picked up a brochure for a triathlon. And then I went to do my first triathlon about 3 months later, where I basically almost drowned in the swim, barely made it through the bike. And I pretty much walked the whole run because we had no idea what we were doing. But for some weird reason, I absolutely loved it and had to do better at it. And then that just started the ball rolling.
That's great. Do you think it's that, going back to the initial half marathon, do you think it's that sort of purity of intention? You had no concept, no preconceived notions, just that went out there for the absolute joy of running that enabled you to do that so easy. And obviously you must have had a natural sort of talent for running. It was pretty obvious, I would have thought, at that point.
I mean, I learned then that's where my endurance, obviously I learned that I have a lot more endurance than the average person. And obviously I look at the times that I ran for that. I mean, it's a very different energy system than, say, at the time, what we would have been running as 5K cross country, or say at the track, we were only probably running the 1500 on the track. So, it was obviously an energy system that my body naturally have. And to this day, right, I excelled more at the Ironman level than more the Olympic distance level in the sport of triathlon, which, he's talking the difference between a 2-hour race and an 8 or 9 hour race. And so yeah, I found out early on that was something I was good at. I was good at going longer than anyone else really wanted to go, is what I really discovered within my own peers. I didn't know if that meant anything at any other level, but I think that not knowing, I mean, I've seen that in my coaching world, that sometimes overthinking it, putting too many things in place, planning too much, sometimes cripples us in performance. And sometimes that purity of not knowing. I mean, I had a close friend who was a high level athlete tell me before my first Ironman, he said, enjoy the naiveness of this moment. It was literally as I was walking to the start line. And he said, you will never feel this naive in an Ironman ever again. From this moment forward, you will know exactly how much pain you will be going through. And he was so true. And you see it in a lot of everyday athletes, that they do better in their first one than necessarily in their second one, because they put expectations on the second one.
Yeah. So as a 14-year-old now, would you be allowed to enter a half marathon or?
Big good question. I think a lot of races are 16, if I'm correct. I think sometimes they allow in running races. In triathlon, they don't. Triathlon is very controlled, right? I think at under 16 you can do a sprint, maybe. So that would be like a 500 swim or a 750 meter swim, 20K bike, 5K run. Whereas my first triathlon was a mile swim, 45K bike, and it was actually a 12K run. It was a weird distance I think of it now. I don't even know if we took nutrition on the bike or anything. I don't know if we did anything.
Wow.
I can't even remember now.
That's great. So, okay, so you did your half marathon, you did your first triathlon. What did you do from there? Did you join a club? Did you find a coach? Did you just carry on with that lovely sort of easy, naive way? What was the process for you?
So then I went, that would have been the transition of going to grade 9, grade 10. So now all of a sudden sport becomes a little bit more, more higher end, right? You have track teams and cross-country running teams. So school definitely played a big factor in the ability of improving my running. We had good coaches at my high school. So my track coach, my cross-country coach both played a big part. I also was really lucky. I believe she was a 4-time Olympian. Angela Schmidt-Foster was a cross-country skier from our town. And so she basically took me under her wing, and she did triathlons in the summer for her cross training for skiing. And so we did a lot of our training. She was nearing the end of her career. And so it was just fantastic to have someone with such knowledge and understanding of high performance sport. And I think she was probably one of my first role models in sort of motivating me to go to that next level in sport. And then eventually, I believe 2 years later in 92 or 93, I had my first triathlon coach. But at the time, I mean, I think Ontario only had, or even in Canada, we probably had 2 or 3 triathlon based coaches. And so we started working, I started working with Barry Shepley, who is a famous coach here in Ontario. And basically, everyone that wanted to compete at the national level in triathlon, they were all pretty much working with him. In Ontario, there'd be another coach in Quebec, another coach out in BC. And we worked towards trying to make, all of us were working towards trying to make our first world championships. And so basically from 92 to 92 to 93, I was just purely training. We didn't do it. I mean, we did a bunch of races and just sort of getting used to racing. But it wasn't until 93, late 93, that I did my first national championships. Mm-hmm. And just missed out on my first world team. And it was in 94 was really my pinnacle year. In 1994, I went out to junior nationals, and I think I went in ranked 12th or maybe 10th in the country, and got my first spot on the team. You had to come top 6, and I came second at nationals. That really was a make or break, because I had, by that point, that's grade 13. I was essentially looking at, am I going to university or am I doing this triathlon thing? And by making the team to actually go to New Zealand for the World Championships, I put school on hold for the year and traveled to New Zealand, spent some time there training, and did my first World Championships, which then basically started all the rest that's history. I don't know if I had made that team, whether I would have continued on in the sport to the same degree that I have to the rest of my life, really.
It's quite interesting. My normal co-host, Katie, had a very similar experience with the snowboarding thing. She decided to take time out from university and concentrate on her snowboarding to get into the Canadian national team. So it's interesting, isn't it, when athletes get to that sort of 18, 19 university age, it's also the point where if they're going to go for it as a sort of a potential professional athlete, they've got to make that choice, haven't they? Then, I mean, I don't know, do you have the same sort of university system in Canada for young athletes coming through as they do in the States? I know there's a lot of options for them to go to scholarships in the
back then, no. I mean, back then, like I looked at trying to go, obviously I looked at trying to go to university. I mean, back then there wasn't anything triathlon-based scholarships. There are now. You can literally go to university on a triathlon scholarship. Nothing existed back then. You would have to go on a scholarship for running. And I got a couple of scholarships for running. But they were, you're not biking, you're not swimming. I wasn't going to be allowed to do anything else other than run. So I actually turned them down. In Canada back then, it wasn't as supportive as I think it is now. But my focus was balancing. I mean, I knew I wanted to go back to university. I was taking kinesiology and then later taking psychology as also part of my major because I really wanted to learn that connection between the two. So university was kind of a little bit kind of on the selfish standpoint in that I didn't actually go to university because I thought I would do something with a career of it. At the time, it was like, this is only going to help my training. Taking kin and taking psychology, I thought this is like the best education I could ever get for my racing at the time. And that was really my motivation, although it really did turn into my passion and something I really wanted to do once I realized the level that I was going to get at in my sport was never going to be truly at that next level that it was going to be a true living. And so very quickly, I think it was 1998, that's when I made that switch to, okay, I know I'm good at triathlon, but I'm not great at triathlon. And, I have friends that, have won gold medals at the Olympics and numerous Ironmans at the world level. And while I was good, I wasn't that good. And so I knew that I needed to go to plan B at some point, and there needed to be a career.
When you say, it's quite interesting, we've had lots of guests on who come up with terms that may seem technical. You talk about kinesiology. What does that mean in the sense that you were looking at it and studying it?
So for me, actually, it was really easy. We have grade 13, or back then it was called OAC, before you go off to university. And I was an average student, like high 70s, mid 80s. And I took a kin course. So basically human movement, and anatomy, motor programming, that kind of stuff. And I got 99 and I was like, this is easy. Like, I don't get why anyone finds this difficult. As someone who's good at math, I'm sure looks at math going, I don't know why anyone finds this difficult. I didn't ever get math, but kin was just every part of kinesiology made sense to me. Whether you were talking about muscles, origin, insertions, whether you were talking about sliding filament theory or anything of that stuff just came to me like, I get it. I totally get it because I could relate it everything to sport. So for me, going to university for that, it was just like, I'm learning more about how my body's going to work. And then that's going to help me. Because at that point, I was a little bit more self-coached than coached. And so I had more of two advisors than strictly coaches at that time.
Right. Yeah, no, that's lovely. Kinesiology is that's absolutely my love as well. So, but it's one of those terms that sometimes people don't necessarily understand. You've explained it beautifully. The movement, so three-dimensional understanding of the body, I tend to refer
That's
to.
a great way of putting it.
Not too many people have that as a sort of a natural thing, but what you've just described there is absolutely perfect. Yeah. So Okay, so you've gone to that realization where you've got a plan B in place for your studying as well, but you're still competing at a very, very high level in both triathlon and then that move to Ironman as well. So, I mean, where did it take you? I mean, you traveled abroad competing at this stage, or any interesting trips and stories to be told on this?
Yeah, I mean, in one of my last big years, sort of the year I made the decision. So, of course, going backwards, in '95, it got announced that the triathlon would be in the Olympics in Sydney in 2000. I was standing beside Simon Whitfield at the day we were told. I was standing right beside Simon Whitfield, and he said to us in the parking lot in Collingwood, Ontario, "I'm going to win the gold medal." And of course, we all laughed at him. But he did say that. And we all went off. And for the next 5 years, we all tried to collect points. You had to collect points to qualify for the Olympics. And so that meant going off to World Cup races, going off to these ITU point races, and collecting it. And so in '98, at that point, there were about 3 other athletes that had done, well, but none of us had done well enough to actually even make it to Sydney, Simon included. We were all still struggling a little bit to get the points necessary to get there. I started coming to that realization, but I got the opportunity on some of these ITU points races to go to the duathlon world championships, which is run, bike, run. And actually I was the Canadian team captain, which was a cool honor. Great. Anytime you can go represent your country at a world championships, especially as a professional, was just an amazing experience. Unfortunately, I went over my handlebars in an epic crash at that race, but still finished. But it was it was one of my first. In '96, I went to a world championships for triathlon at the 70.3 distance. That was a first humbling experience of truly what it's like to race at the World Cup level. And then I did that again at the ITU. And I think it was just really starting to hit home that at that time, there is a whole nother echelon of athlete above. I come home and everyone says, "Oh my gosh, you're so fast." But I knew, my friends that I trained with, they were, Simon was that much faster. And of course, in 2000, he went on to win the gold medal. So I had a front row seat of knowing what great was, and I could compare myself to what great was. And so it was at that time that I think I learned a lesson. But yeah, as you asked, I had lots of great experiences. I got to race in Germany numerous times. We went, as I said, to New Zealand. I've been all over North America racing in Ironman events. Of course, out to Hawaii 3 times for the World Championships for Ironman. So I feel very lucky to have seen a great part of the world.
That's quite some experience, isn't it? And captaining the duathlon would have been pretty special. I think I can't, as a sports person, I can't think of anything better than captaining your own country's team in something. I mean, it's just.
Someone asked me the other day that whether I had been how I had been nominated for that, and I can't remember whether it was coach's decision or whether it was. I think it was the athletes' nominations. So either way, I've said like that to me is it's an honor because it's what people because. To me, how you're perceived is just as important. What you're putting out there is just as important as what you do on the playing field.
Yeah. So at that stage, so look at like slightly more detail in terms of you've become a coach, but what were you putting in the way of hours for training? I mean, I've seen some of the programs that people training for world championships have been put through over here. Just give us a sort of a snapshot, if you like, or a window of a typical few days training, 3 or 4 days. How would it go for you to compete at the level that you were competing at there?
So we were definitely of the era. I mean, we were really in one of the first eras of the sport of triathlon. So as I always joke with my running friends or even my swimming friends, they're training for one sport. So they train their energy system. So they'll train their anaerobic system. They'll train their VO2 max system. They'll put in their easy aerobic mileage, but they have to do that for one sport. We're doing all three. And so it is that, it goes against all wisdom to some degree. I was never a big volume guy. There are a lot of people that I train with that were upwards over 30 hours. 20 hours was pretty much my normal higher volume weeks. I could never manage to handle more volume. I was in the pool typically 5 days a week. I trained depending on where I was in life. While I was in university, I trained with one of the local swim teams there. When I moved to Toronto for a short period of time, I trained with one of the swim teams there. So I was very lucky to have high performance swim coaches for my swimming. They would always be very gracious to let me swim with their national level programs while I was only a triathlete at the time, not a national level swimming level. Cycling would be typically upwards of 7 to 8 hours a week. So that was typically where it was lower than the average person. And then running, I would be between 50 and 60K a week. So for me, again, compared to some people, that was a little bit more on the lower side of the volume. Again, I would constantly run into injuries at that age in trying to handle the mileage that everyone else was doing that I was competing against.
I've just noticed, Richard, that my lovely co-host Katie has appeared on the screen. She's joining us. Katie, welcome. How are you?
I'm doing all right. Thank you very much for the welcome, Stuart. Good. It's been a big morning, but Richard, nice to meet you online.
Nice to meet you as well.
And you're from Ontario, I hear?
I am. I hear that you're from the same neck of the woods.
I am. Actually, my folks are visiting me from Canada right now in New Zealand. So it's been a big day. But I hear we're talking about injuries.
So we were just discussing what kind of injuries that I had, and I was actually really lucky. I didn't have any very serious injuries while I had been training, but I did have an osteochondroma when I was younger, which is a tumor that grows off your femur, and I had to have it surgically removed. When I think I was about 14 or 15. It was actually I guess it was 16 or 17. It was after I had started seriously training. And so I always had, VMO was always a little bit weaker because of that, because it's right along the surgical line. And so I always found myself, that was my first introduction into the world of rehab. So I guess I got into the world of understanding that the body had to be balanced really early on, and the benefits of exercise or exercises that could help to balance those kinds of things, and why you would do certain exercise to help correct any imbalance. I had a lot of patellofemoral issues that I just had to be addressed early on, but nothing that was ever like career sidelining where I was losing months on end. And I was very fortunate, never have any stress fractures or anything of that nature for a long time, until, of course, for anyone that's ever seen a videos of me in 2010, so way after my professional career and after starting a family and work and all that kind of stuff, I made this great decision of come back as an age group athlete. And I was in a race in Welland, and I got hit by a car in the race and broke my humerus, shattered my leg, massive road rash, and spent the better part of 2010 and 2011 on the sidelines and trying to recover, which then gave me a huge goal to come back in 2012 and a real path to my what we call it middle age challenge as I was approaching at that age almost 40. So it was for me, everything in life is trying to make a comeback, or trying to work towards something, I guess is a better way of saying it. And so when I was lying there, with the broken arm and healing the leg and not being able to walk, and can't imagine life without walking. And then I couldn't imagine life without swimming, and made a plan of 3 years trying to get back to, by the time I was 40, back to the World Championships in 2014 and race in Hawaii as a 40-year-old. So it was a neat journey. It was successful, and it was a neat path. And actually that was the last time I did triathlon at that time. And then I moved on after that to other adventures.
Wow, that's quite a quite a comeback. I mean, did things like, well, the earlier injuries in particular, where you were learning about the sort of the kinesthesia, if you like, the movement side, did that flavor you towards your coaching goals? Was that a part of the sort of the learning process, if you like, or a motivation to wanting to help others through coaching? Or was that a sort of a different process for you?
It's interesting. I think the coaching aspect of me, if my kids were behind me right now, they would yell that I don't know how to do anything without coaching. In that I coach everything. I'm sure if Kate was doing something on a snowboard, I might even tell her about something on the edge. And, if you just move your body this way a little bit, and they'd be like, Dad, you don't know anything about snowboarding. And so it is, it is interesting. My brain has always been along the lines of how could you do anything better? And I think I've also always been that person that wanted to lead. I was always the kid that put their hand up to be the leader of a group or something like that. I was probably hated for it. But that's just I think that's my nature. And so you combine that nature with a sport background, and I think it was a pretty easy connection. Yeah. So I think when I had my injuries, I think that was really just my first education into the breakdown of the body and understanding the body more than your legs, torso and your arms. And at that age, the age of 16, that's pretty much was my basic understanding of the human body. And so it started me down that path, which I told you by grade 13, when I first introduced to kinesiology, that's when it was just like, well, okay, I've been learning about this stuff by that point for almost 3 years. So it was a natural progression into that world of human movement.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Katie, you obviously went through a similar process, didn't you, as well? With
I wouldn't really say similar process. Like, that's what you went through, Richard, is pretty, like, I don't know, getting taken out by a car in a race and then coming back, making the 3-year plan and everything. I don't know if it's comparable. Like, the mental, obstacle course that you went through to get from A to B, to get to that race in Hawaii just must have been like, wow, the highs and lows, like, can you go talk a little bit about the mental side about that journey?
Well, I think like anything for me, lying on the couch, 6 months after the accident, still just trying to figure out how to walk. And, the arm was still not recovered. And it was incredibly difficult. And I think it's easier to plan than worry. At least that's the way my brain works. And so for me, creating those plans, putting things in place, one step at a time, sort of climbing those stairs, I could have something to look forward to. I think if I just said Hawaii 2014, it would be unreachable, right? You just sit there going, there's no possible way. But for me, the way my brain works, it was like I worked backwards from that. So 2013, I had to qualify. So I picked out the race I needed to qualify. 2012, I needed to get fast again because I sucked. So I went back and I raced on the pro circuit here in Ontario. Now, obviously a much, much lower circuit than World Cup or intercontinental racing. But it's still relatively competitive here, and raced some guys that were in their young ages. They were like 21, 22. I was 38 at the time. And so it was kind of fun to race them. And I was the old fart. And I actually ended up winning the series. Those guys went on to amazing stuff. One of them still ranked in the top, I think 15 or 16 in the world right now. And so it is, I think it's really important to put those little stepping stones in place so that you can get one step. I remember in 2011, I think it was somewhere around February or March, I finally got the okay to go into the water. My arm still didn't bend past 90 degrees. And I literally got in the water and swam with one arm. And I was just flopping along in the water thinking, it was horrible. I went home, I think, really upset. And I think the next 2 days later, I went back to the pool and it was a bit better. And I was like, okay, so just step by step, just digging away at it. And I think as long as you're making forward progress and taking down those barriers slowly, and you know the direction you're trying to go in, it's a lot easier versus just having some big goal sitting out there that's just unattainable.
You must have had a really good support team behind you while going through that phase. Like, can you tell us a bit about, who was the captain? Who, what did you go seek have a special physio dude? Or, I mean, obviously, like, your wife must have played a big part, right? You said you're married and.
Yep. So my wife is a chiropractor, so that becomes really handy. So that's a huge component just from the sheer understanding. I've always had some major support through physio. Actually, the person who I did my physio through with my arm was actually, in a weird coincidence, my cross-country running teammate in Midland when we were growing up through high school, who then moved to the same town. We're in Orangeville. He moved to Orangeville as well. And so just at a coincidence ends up being my physio here. So great, because he kind of understood the pathway I was going on. And just, I actually had some amazing younger athletes that I trained with during that time. Most 38-year-olds in Orangeville would shake their heads at what I was trying to do. Whereas I'd meet up with some of these younger guys to go out for a 3 or 4 hour ride. And they were some of the fondest memories of those years out on the bike. Some of my best training, because the pressure was off. I wasn't doing this as a career anymore. I had a job. I had a family. We'd been through a lot. As a family, my daughter had cancer when she was younger, and back in 2005 to 2007. So we'd come a long way as a family as well, and been through a lot of things. So I think we had learned how to deal with things and move forward. And I think all those things came together.
Could I just jumping in on that, Richard? I noticed somewhere you started it. I hadn't realized what the motivation was for this, but I noticed in your sort of bio there was an astonishing amount of money that you've raised for a children's cancer charity.
Yeah.
And now I understand why. But can you tell us about that a little bit? That sounds absolutely wonderful.
Well, I think during the time where my daughter was in at Sick Kids, one of the things that really, my wife and I are very lucky that we're self-employed. We had the ability to rearrange our lives, as hellish as it was. We could create a schedule that fit with her treatment. A lot of families didn't have that luxury. A lot of times one parent quit their job to take care of the kids, or to take care of the child that was in treatment. And so there was a charity called POGO, Pediatrics Oncology Group of Ontario. And they had a fund that helped parents that with that travel in conjunction with something like a Ronald McDonald House, where they put up families when they're in the city. But this helped with things like medicine and treatment of and other different things. So I got to know them through the stuff that we were just doing with Elizabeth. And I asked them, I was like, would it be beneficial to do a fundraiser? And they're like, absolutely. So I put it out to actually one of our local Ironman organizers, actually at the time, one of the only Ironmans in Eastern North America was Lake Placid. And he gave me, so at the time, I think a race entry fee was, I think it was something like $600. And he gave me 10 free spots, which saved us a ton of money. And we put that automatically directly towards the money raised. And then to get that spot, people had to guarantee raising a certain amount of money. I think it was $2,000. And they all went, obviously, with the amount of money, $250,000, they went way over that. And we gave 100%. We didn't have to take a cut at all. And it was amazing. So just to give all that money to them felt really great. And for me, again, I found it tough when she was going through treatment, how to relate to it all. And that was, again, back to that leadership role. That's just sort of the route I took to sort of deal with it myself.
Oh, that's wonderful. Well done. Congratulations on that. Yeah.
What a huge accomplishment.
So you've got a lovely understated way about you of playing down your achievements. Now, obviously that in itself, that last subject matter is a wonderful achievement, but you've placed yourself in that not quite great category, but just give us a little flavor. I mean, what standards, what competitions did you win? Where are you at now as a I don't know what age group you're in now, Richard, in these
approaching 50. So
I can remember 50. I can almost remember 50.
I freaked my kids out, the kids I coached, because they were like, what are you, 40? I'm like, no, 50. They're like, no, my mom's like 42. You're not 50. So I was like, I shake my head sometimes myself when I hear myself say I'm almost 50. So in high school for the 1500, I ran 4:06. So for the metric mile, which I would learn later, that was pretty good. Yes. But I also ran at a time with Kevin Sullivan, who went on to, 3 Olympics, running, 3:36. So for me, it was always that I had people that I knew that were obviously way better. So my perspective was always totally different than everybody else. I ran 9, never broke 9 for 3,000. I ran 15 for 5. I don't think I ever got under 32 for 10. 112 for a half marathon. Never ran a marathon properly trained. Ironman's the same. I was quite often in top 10 at an Ironman. I think even top 7 at an Ironman, but never on the podium of an Ironman. Lots of local wins, lots of any of the pro tour that we had around in Ontario or in Canada, lots of wins, but also podiums at that level of racing, which a lot of fond memories. But I've accomplished a lot of great things. For me, it's always about the challenge, though. I mean, maybe this is more later in life. For me, and much like the latest challenge that I've undertaken, leaving triathlon in 2014, I moved on to ultra running. And the reason being, I felt like after 2014, I put everything into triathlon that I thought I could do at the time, based on the level and the age that I was at, and that it was time to do something different that I couldn't compare any times to. And that ultra running was really taking off. And I sort of dabbled in the 50K and then an 80K, and then moved up to 100K during COVID, and then finally signed up for 100 miles. All of this trail running, not road running. And so I did my first 100-mile race in September this year. Unfortunately, after having COVID for 3 weeks and then right into my taper. So lost the last 6 weeks of my training program. So went into it incredibly undertrained. But friends convinced me to give her a shot anyway. And it was a horrific experience, but a good one. I placed second, 21 hours, third fastest time ever on that course, I think it is. But it was one of the most, everything else I've done in my life doesn't even come close to the mental difficulty of that race. I had issues 4 hours in, and so started having the mental battles of how the heck am I going to deal with this, knowing I knew the window was somewhere between 20 hours on a perfect day and probably 23 if I struggled a fair bit near the end. And I kind of shot the middle in the end of it all. But what kept me going was every aid check we get about 20K, they would say the leader was only 10 minutes ahead or only 8 minutes ahead. And actually at one point I actually caught him, which then he took off again. We were only together for 1 minute of 21 hours. Literally, as soon as he saw me, he sprinted off. I'm like, good on you. I was never thinking about the position. I actually just kept using him because I would literally get to the aid station thinking, oh my God, I feel horrible. I feel like I'm running so slow. And then my wife would say, you're only still like 8 minutes behind it. You've lost no time over the last 20K. I'm like, oh, okay. Well, then I can't be doing that badly. And that would be a huge motivational boost because I was only worried about myself. I had no issue. I didn't need to catch. I didn't care if anyone caught me. My whole goal was to finish. And at 15 hours, 118K, I think it was in, I hit an all-time low. I was completely out of it. It's obviously getting dark at that point. We'd started at 6 a.m. in the dark, gone through the day. It's now dark again. Headlamps are on. We'd gone through this super technical section where you're climbing. And I just came down the road to the aid station, and my wife and my son were there. And our rule was never sit down. You're not going to sit down. And so when she went to the car, she says to me, well, she goes to the car, and I say to my son, I'm just going to sit down in the cooler. He goes, no, you're not allowed to sit down in the cooler. I'm like, I got to sit down in the cooler. I'm done. I said, I'm absolutely done. I can't go. I got 7 more hours for sure. My quads are shattered. My ankles are shattered. I'm completely out of energy. And my lovely wife comes up to me and she goes, no, you're fine. She gives me this. We came up with our own sport drink concoction of sea salt and ginger tea to calm the stomach and to give us the necessary salt and just to get away from all the sugars that we've been eating. And it was a huge boost. And she stuffed my nutrition pack with the food and necessary waters I needed for the next to get to the next aid station. And she just naturally pushed me off on my own way ago because she knew what was best. She knew I just needed to keep moving. And I've said to so many people, if she was not there, the two of them, I would have quit for sure. I couldn't imagine moving on. I would struggle for the next sort of 20, 30 minutes. And then the weirdest thing ever, I made this turn. The pain didn't go away, but my mental attitude totally shifted. And as I rounded, this 100-mile was 4 loops of the same course. And so as I rounded the finish line for the last time, the next time I'd be back for the finish, and it started out on the last 41.6 kilometer loop, it was like mentally a total shift because now I was on the home stretch. And it was amazing how much the mind came into it. And while the last 41 kilometers was an incredible battle of the pain, it wasn't a battle of, oh my God, I can't do this. It was just you need to hang on. You need to deal with this pain. You need to get through it. And finishing that, while I was not satisfied with the performance of the whole thing for me because of the lack of fitness I went into it with, the achievement of being able to keep it together under the circumstances, I never in a million years would imagine I could push myself that hard with that much pain for that long. And for that, that's what I'm probably most proud of.
That's remarkable. Tell me, you studied psychology.
Yes.
How useful did that prove in those moments? Or was it more of a hindrance?
No. Well, so my studying of psychology was strictly for sport. I actually at one point through university wanted to become a sports psychologist. And so I love how the component, and I think because I've had a lot of negative energy from myself and pressures I put on myself when I was younger that I learned later in life how to deal with. I wish I had been able to deal with it or had someone help me deal with it. And with my swimming coaching with these young kids, I spent a ton of time working on that. Yeah, understanding the two mindsets that you have when you race, and how people have it as the wolves on your shoulder, the good wolf and the bad wolf, or whatever imagery you have, that yin and yang of you should stop. What are you doing? This is stupid. Or no, you got this. You can keep it together. As I said, I literally battled with that from 4 hours in onward. And I would say even earlier because I had the fear of the unknown because I hadn't done a long run in 6 weeks. I didn't know whether my body, I knew physically I am an endurance junkie. I can go for a really long time. That wasn't the question. I knew my heart and lungs and even my mind to some degree would be okay. For me, I knew what was going to happen to my legs. I know when I'm well trained, I can pound through a lot. And when I'm untrained, my quads fall apart. And they fell apart. But I learned I can run through it. And while I couldn't walk for 3 days straight, they do come around. And it's remarkable how your body recovers.
The return of the quads.
Yes.
That's just it, Richard. It sounds like you've been doing this for quite a long time. Like, what do you think attributes to the longevity of your sport life, even with injuries and like what has been kind of a couple of game changers or, really important components that you found that give you that long life in sport?
Well, I think the first thing I say to all of my clients, and I say it to my swimmers as well that I coach in competitive swimming, that people say, I have to go for a run, or I have to go to the pool now, or I have to go to the gym. I said, no. You don't have to do anything. You get to. That's a huge word difference. When I was younger, I had to, that was the word I would use. I have to go to the pool now. Especially when it was trying to be a job, I had to do things. I felt like that's what it was. I think later in life, it's been that I get to, and that's been no one makes me. I'm going to go for a run right after this podcast. And it's getting dark out, and it's a little bit snowy, rainy right now, but I get to go out for a run. Most people would say that like, oh my God, I don't want to go out there. But for me, I really look forward to it. I'm going to go into the woods and enjoy myself in the dark. It's one of my favorite things to do. Yeah. I think the biggest thing is that for me, it is one of the most important parts and one of my favorite parts of the day. It's a big part of my own therapy as a person, and it makes me a better person, makes me a better dad, makes me a better husband, makes me a better coach when I've taken the time to do my own training. But then from an athletic standpoint, I just always think that next goal is great. As much as I said, 2014 was my last triathlon. Now bridging towards 50, I've stepped back into the pool for the first time in over 7 years. I spend 20 hours a week coaching on the deck. And so
but you weren't getting into the water.
And I was not touching the water. And it was weird. Midway through last year, I all of a sudden looked at the water. I'm like, I'd actually like to get back in the water again. And so, yes, it was an incredibly rude awakening getting back in the water in September.
Your kids must have loved it.
The kids loved it because they don't swim at the same. So the masters group swims at a different time, but a bunch of the kids that I used to coach swim beside me, and they love to tease me once they see the sets. It's actually helped my coaching because it's like we do some drills that I give out, but I've given it out since I became a swim coach, not since I swam. So I'd never actually physically done the drill. And so to do the drill, I'm like, oh my God, this is so hard. Why would anyone want to do this? So the kids think that's really funny. But again, back to that challenge, I feel like I'm removed enough from triathlon. At the age of 40, I was too connected to still a high performance level. Now going back and there's a potential chance, a strong chance, I will do some triathlon this summer and into next as I approach 50, and maybe try to get back to a high level for myself at 50. But that high level now will be based off of where I am now and where I think percentage wise I can get back to at this age, and a different time commitment to life. But I love that challenge. And I think that's the most fun is sort of sitting down there with the computer and blotting it out and sort of saying, okay, well, what can we do? My wife and I are going to run indoor track and field this winter as master stuff. And I'm going to go back and run the mile and run the 1500 on the track and the 3000 and stuff like I did when I was a kid. It doesn't relate at all to triathlon necessarily, but it's a fun goal to get you through the winter in the cold months. And so just fun challenges like that. And I think that's what keeps it fresh. That's what ultra running was for many years for me. That's what I even did some off-road triathlons. I always like the next challenge. I think that's what's most interesting and why I've been able to stay at it for so long.
Makes
that's
sense.
a great question, Katie. I mean, that's one of the themes of our podcast, Richard, is this. Katie made the point about longevity. And that's one of the main themes of our podcast, is to help just put things out there to give to listeners that might help them retain that desire and that physical competence, etc., for longevity in their chosen activity. So if there's one thing that you could think of, what would it be as a top tip for the day?
I think first and foremost, I think athletes right now take things too seriously. I think the world takes everything too seriously right now. I think we need to get back to having fun. And the problem why people don't like the word fun is that they think that that's not being serious about being fast or competitive. I look at kids now, like in our swim program, they're only allowed to swim. And I'm like, they can do other sports. And yet, nope, you got to do just this one sport. And my fear is the longevity is going to be so small. They're going to burn out. They only know one thing. As soon as they're not good at that one thing, they're done. Whereas I think if younger age, like I look at my youth, like there is literally, you'd be hard pressed to find a sport that I didn't do before 12 years of age. I pretty much from any racket sport you can name to every winter sport to every summer sport, So I think having a variety in your life and not taking it too seriously is really important. But again, having realistic goals and going about that. And I think also understanding what you're doing in your training. Realizing, I have clients quite often ask me, like, I'm really stressed about the training. And I really try to stress home to them about what workouts you need to focus on, the performance aspect to get the physiological change. But that on all of that, the 80-20 rule, the 80% of your training that is supposed to be just aerobic and easy, that while we put structure into it, it really just needs to be very relaxing and doesn't need to be stressful. You don't need to be checking your heart rate endlessly. You need to learn how to go off of feel and have fun with it. Get off the road if they're a runner and get into the woods and have fun, because the heart and lungs don't know where you are. And yes, when you need to get into that specificity before a major race, you got to be dialing that in the final weeks in, but definitely this time of year, I really stress to people, get out and have fun, do some different stuff. And again, I think that all adds up to longevity and enjoyment of sport.
That's a brilliant answer.
Yeah, definitely. But what about like some of the equipment or tech or something? Has there been anything in particular that you've like really loved and grasped onto? Like, we talked to a gentleman this week, and for him, it was changing into a minimalist shoe and, like things like that.
Well, technology from when I started to where we are now is like, so I started my competitive career. Well, I started not competitive, but when I started my running career, was we talked about at the beginning, was 1989. Yeah, I mean, you grabbed a pair of shoes from the local running room. I think it was at the time, was the only running store that existed. And away you go. The technology has totally changed. I grabbed my first bike from the local bike shop. I think it was just your general 10-speed road bike. Getting back into the world of triathlon, the bike I would want to ride would be about $20,000.
Yeah.
I won't be riding that bike unless some sponsor out there wants to send it to me. But that will not be in my budget. The technology, the world has totally changed for the good and for the bad. I think GPS trackers, foot pod trackers, all those things have been amazing. I don't leave a workout without it. But I think it's also been detrimental to a lot of athletes as well. I think people, the joke is if there is no data, there was no workout. And I think that is part of that stress component. Although I think the knowledge of what we know we're doing is so greater now than what we did before. The introduction to power on the bike was probably one of the greatest tools I got in about, I think it was 2000 was my first power meter. That probably was one of the greatest tools that I ever got in the world of cycling and totally transformed how I rode a bike. I think that was probably the biggest tool that we ever had. I always loved the technology on the bike. I love the look of a really fast looking with race wheels bike. It just feels so cool to be out there going hard on a tri-bike. It's one of the feelings that I love the most. But also the technology of the shoes in the past 2 to 3 years, the introduction of the carbon plated shoe has really transformed the world of running. And I joke, it's been great for those of us getting older, because all of a sudden that 4% improvement you get with the running shoes, you've aged and you've lost 4%. And so you put the shoes on and you're right back where you were. So the technology of this world is constantly changing and been neat to see. And but I think if I was to say one thing that really transformed me the most and I enjoyed the most was probably the power meter.
Really?
We touched just earlier on, Katie, we touched on a guy who's a common link actually between you two. There's Scott Griswood. And you've both, I believe, visited, obviously at different times, Scott's offices and clinic, and been put through this whole gait assessment. So, Richard, what did that sort of do for you? Was there an issue that you had that you needed to address, or was it something you found particularly useful?
Yeah, so I'd been suffering from Scott and I had worked off and on for, I think, 3 years prior to him getting the full gait assessment stuff. And he had been doing some of his shockwave on me, and with great results. And his understanding of the human movement was just so awesome. So when he got the gait stuff, I had an injury of the I'm going to hopefully say it, the pezants, the goose foot, they say, down the inner thigh, down by the knee. So I had a sort of tendonitis down there, some inflammation, and it just wasn't going away. We were trying to figure out what was causing it. So he did the classic. He's like, bring all your shoes in and let's test them. So I laughed. I brought a bunch of different pairs. And so he said, don't tell me a thing. We're just going to put you on. We're going to test your gait. And so we started with barefoot for the first. And then we went different shoes, even my flip-flops that I happen to wear there, which are my favorite shoes ever. So the best is after the assessment. So I didn't tell him anything about them. The barefoot obviously was the best. Then my sandals actually were the second best, which was the most hilarious part. Third was the shoe I do the most training in during the summer, but where this injury occurred was through the winter months, treadmill and outside running on the road. The one pair of shoes I put on had been doing all of my training in that he didn't know at the time, turned out to be the absolute worst. And he's like, you should never, ever be wearing these shoes. He's like, I hope you don't do many miles in this. I'm like, oh yeah, that shoe only has about 1,000 kilometers in it. He's like, yeah. And lo and behold, we cut that shoe out. We got in, made sure the shoe that I was using on the road did have the proper. And the funny thing is, unfortunately, they all had barefoot in them. But the way this shoe broke down just couldn't accommodate for that. And so, yeah, that was a real eye opener for me on how much the shoe itself has a major impact on it.
Mm-hmm. That's funny because I have a very similar story with Scott about a pair of shoes. And I was training at, CSIO.
Yes.
I was training at CSIO, and he was like,
what is CSIO?
It's like the Sports Institute, Canadian Sports Institute of Ontario, and then there's one in every province kind of thing, right? It's where these elite athletes get to go train, and they get all this tech and they get these trainers and everything. And he was like, I can't believe you've been training in these shoes with these guys and had these injuries and they didn't figure it out, So, but same thing, like my thing went like 1,000% off of your regular gait. Yeah.
I think
so. I can relate to that, Richard.
Yep.
Yeah, I think for the listener, just quickly for the listener, what we're talking about here is assessing people's gait in different trainers. Richard, you were wearing our sponsor's insole as well, Barefoot Science insole as well. So you had that proprioceptive stimulus in every pair of shoes.
So
that was
yes,
that was a constant.
Yeah, and Scott does do a test. In the test, he does not wear we did not put the insoles in because he doesn't want the insole to impact how the shoe breaks. So in fairness, we probably should do the test again with the barefoot in to see if the barefoot would correct it a bit more and make it a bit better. But it was it was so night and day different to all my favorite was that my sandals performed better than these running shoes did. That's my favorite part.
Do you run in the sandals?
Definitely not. They are true flip-flops.
Oh, right. Not like the traditional, because the sandal, of course, is the original sandal of the Sand tribe from Africa, isn't it? That's where it comes from.
No,
But,
these are truly fun flip flops that I love wearing. That have they do have good support, but not they are a comfy shoe, not a performance shoe by any means.
I had a lovely situation with a fantastic runner and personal trainer who was a cross country skier, fantastic endurance athlete like yourself, and he came in and I put him through the test, and he bought two pairs of £120, so $200 trainers with him, and the pair that he bought off of Amazon for about £30 that he wears to go into people's houses so he doesn't carry mud in. And you've guessed it already, I'm sure, but the £30 ones off of Amazon were the ones that gave him the best data, and he wasn't very happy. So I think for this issue of testing people, it's a really interesting thing, isn't it? I mean, people go into running shops and they get put on a treadmill and they do a video analysis or whatever it is they may do, but it's this issue of getting data out. And what Scott does and what I do is we get an absolute clear picture of running efficiency, i.e. how much energy somebody's using, as well as the symmetries or the asymmetries, the difference between the left foot and the right foot. And so was this the sort of stuff that gelled with you as a coach and as a sort of a highly technical athlete from the sound of it? Getting that sort of information, how valuable was that for you?
Well, first off, it was huge. But I came with another element in that I sold running shoes for 4 years. So while I was living in Toronto, I worked at a running shoe store. So I know exactly how we fitted people for running shoes and, got them out at whatever level, whether the high school kids coming in doing track or whatever. I mean, what the elements were that we assessed and how we pushed them out the door with shoes was so totally different than anything, obviously, that we were dealing with Scott. Having the data. I mean, if I had worn, if you didn't tell me what shoes I was putting on, I can get a feeling of my different shoes that I wear, whether they're my trail shoes or whether they're my road shoes or whether they're my racing flats or whether they're whatever different trail. I can feel the difference, but I could never tell you ergonomically what's going on different. I could tell you this just feels a little different, but I could never assess to you the angle of rotation or anything of that nature or the impact force that I was going in on. So being able to have that kind of data is remarkable because it's just something that you just can't necessarily see with the naked eye.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. As a matter of interest, as somebody that's worked in running shoe stores, could you see that technology being incorporated into running shops?
I could. I mean, especially if they could figure out, obviously I think of a Saturday afternoon when you're as an employee and I'm running around with 7 people trying to get them shoes, not being terribly practical. But I think in those higher true running stores where you're going in to get the proper fit, the difference between buying your bike, at the local bike shop versus at a bike shop that's working on high performance, you're going to get a proper bike fit at those stores. Those stores are going to do an ergonomic fit. That's just the way they do it in the cycling world now. And actually, I would say like 100% of my clients get fitted for their bike as they get a bike. And it's done by numbers and they look at the ergonomics of it. So I think transitioning that to running is definitely something that would be, it's totally of value. And I think, how many of us have bought a pair of shoes only to take them out for their first run to realize, this just doesn't work for me. And so you're $200 in the hole afterwards. So I think that there's a serious value for it once people get the opportunity to try it.
That's really good. Yeah. Well, we've covered some fantastic ground here today. Katie, have you got any other little questions you want to throw at Richard?
Well, I might have missed it, but because I missed the first half. But like Richard, you wear the Barefoot Science insoles, right? Like I hear you're a pretty big fan of them. So
I have been wearing them I was actually knew this question would come up. I was trying to think. I want to believe it was during my comeback of 2000, and it's got to be around 12 or 13, maybe 14. So I'd have to go back and look at when it's, I can't remember exactly, but I was probably pretty early on. Can someone tell me when the first Barefoot science came out? Because I'm pretty sure I was an early adopter.
I don't know. I think it was like, really, I think it was like in the late 80s or something.
Yeah, it was about, I think the patents go back about, I think the original design was about 25, 28 years ago, something like that.
Yeah. So I'm not as early as I thought it was. But so for me, we were introduced to it through a chiropractic convention, actually. And we started using them just to help the way they are advertising and what they were supposed to do, that anti-orthotic it just resonated with me. The ability to strengthen your foot as opposed to brace your foot. It just made a lot more sense to what I was trying to do, that I wanted my foot to perform, not just to sit around and become lazy. And I joke now that I don't even like wearing a shoe without it in it, because whether it does anything or not, and I know it does, I just like the feel of it. So for me, it's the total addiction of having that under my foot. It just makes me feel comfortable. My foot doesn't know what to do without it. And so for me, it's just what's in my shoe now. I won't ever run without them.
Yeah. And did you test in them when you did the testing with Scott?
He didn't. He took all insoles out. So I was saying that's what I would like to do now, because I'm actually in totally different running shoes now than I was then. And I'd love to go back and do some testing on, because I've found a new line of shoes that I absolutely love. And I'd be really interested, of course, now to hope, fingers crossed that they perform. They actually are performing as well as I think they are, but they just feel amazing on my feet. So I'd love to go back and get that data to back up my perceived feeling of them.
Mm.
Yeah. But like that stimulation in the mid arch and everything, like you were really into that, or is that a part of, like, you have to have it in your shoe? You need that stimulus?
For me, for me, it is, the hard way to describe it is, it's like tying up your shoes. You wouldn't go running with your shoes untied. I just wouldn't go running without my barefoots in my shoes. It's that comfort level. Like a couple of times when I've been swapping them out from one shoe to next, I've left the insoles in the other ones, and I'm like, I slide my foot in and go, something's wrong. And then I'm like, I know what I did. And it's like, I just can't run in them. It's just, that's the feeling I like to have. I like to have that stimulus.
Mm. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree.
I think any of us that have worn them would say the same.
Yeah.
Just miss them when you're not wearing them. Yeah. But interestingly, we had one of our guests a few sessions ago as a chiropractor body worker in the States, and he was very skeptical about them until he went away for a week and forgot to take them with him, and his back problems played him up, and he put them back on when he got home, and within a day, despite having tried all of his own little tricks to fix his back, he found that when he put the shoes back on with the insoles in, his back settled down, and he was a complete and utter convert within a split second from that moment. So, well, one of the other things, that's great.
Well, I was just saying, one of the other things beyond running that I've found that was a huge impact that I didn't realize I wasn't doing all the time was my pool deck shoes. So quite often at early stages, I wasn't putting them in my pool deck shoes because I just didn't think, first off, I only had at the time maybe one pair, and I was swapping them between running shoes, and I didn't have the money to buy another pair to go on deck with. And so I would just go without, and I was having all kinds of back problems. And I need to get another pair and put them in my deck shoes. So deck shoes are what I use for when I'm coaching. And yeah, same scenario. I was having all kinds because I'm standing on a concrete deck for 2 hours.
Yeah.
And so for me to be able to have, it made a big difference once I put them in.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. Well, talking of standing on concrete decks near water, Richard, I'm going to be like your dad here. I'm going to say, you need to get off for this coaching session, surely. So that's where we started, Katie, is Richard's got to get off to coach a swim session.
Yeah.
So I think it's probably a really good time just to thank you so much for coming on as our guest. I found it fascinating. I think you're quite an inspirational character, and what you've done, what you're continuing to do with kids, what you did with the fundraising for the cancer for kids. Oh, wow. What a wonderful life. Well done. Thank you so much for being our guest.
Well, thank you for having me.
Some great stories there, Richard. Some great accomplishments too, of just, in sport and out of sport. You seem like a pretty cool guy to go hang out with. And I've been lucky enough I was a little bit late. My apologies for that, but I'm stoked that I got to talk to you.
Well, privilege to talk to both of you guys, and thank you for having me on.
That's an absolute pleasure. Great. Thank you.
Well, to all of our listeners out there, thank you for tuning in. Don't forget to give Richard Pady a look up there.
Yep, it's healthyresults.ca.
Healthy Results, yeah.
Healthy Results, yep. Check out Richard's Healthy Results. And he's got an Instagram too. And Stuart, thank you for letting me come in late.
Well, you're always welcome.
And don't forget to subscribe.
Great stuff. Thanks ever so much, guys.
You've been listening to the Born to Be Barefoot podcast with myself, Kate Tsuyuki, and the wonderful Stuart Gordon. Please remember to hit the subscribe button and give us a 5-star review. We'll see you guys next week.